They release one little thing and then another little thing. People have promised to release these files before. Every president, I think, since the assassination. Well, I may throw a curve at you and say, we already know who did it.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, we have, with the distinction, the first guest who is a third-time returner, and we're so grateful to have him. I'm an old hockey player, Ken, and so for me, this is a hat trick. Ken McCarthy back on the program. And really, we really need to have him back again because he writes on so many different topics in a very fascinating way. Of course, he's written about COVID-19. He's written about Fauci, his great book, What the Nurses Saw, that we talked about the last time he was on our program. For those of you interested, that's in our catalog about a year ago now. Great interview. We learned a lot about that book. But he's also written extensively on the Kennedys. We're going to be talking about that today. And by the way, he's also an internet pioneer. So back on the program, Ken McCarthy, great to see you again, sir.
Thanks for having me. This is a fun show to be on. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. I always enjoy our conversations, and also I learn so much whenever you're on the program because you have such an eclectic history and knowledge. So before we introduce him properly to those of you who don't know him, we're going to go to our framing aphorisms. And if you know Ken's books, and if you don't know, you should check them out. He's written a lot about someone named Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we're going to be talking about on the program today. He said this, Dr. Fauci, he said, "I think you can trust me." Okay, stop laughing. "I think you can trust me with a track record of telling the truth." And that was actually in response at a congressional hearing. Next, from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whom we're also going to be talking about today and whom our guest has written about, who said the first sign of tyranny is government's complicity in privatizing the commons for private gain. How true that is. Next, the great lawyer, New Orleans lawyer who pressed the issue of what happened with the John F. Kennedy assassination, Jim Garrison, who wrote, "It is important to know who killed Jack Kennedy and why." And finally, from John F. Kennedy himself, who was so quotable, said so many things, but one of my favorites, he said, "One person can make a difference and everyone should try." Well, one person who is making a difference and trying very hard to do so and is being successful is our guest, Ken McCarthy. As I said, a seminal pioneer both of the commercial internet and citizen journalism. And Time magazine actually credits him with being the first person to recognize and articulate the importance of the click-through rate as a key metric for making the internet commercially viable. Don't ask me how he figured that out. In 1997, he launched the first news blog ever, a detailed account of an election fraud investigation in San Francisco as it unfolded. It turns out there's a lot of election fraud in San Francisco. But he's written, he's been published everywhere. He's written several books, all of them actually, but for the two that we are going to be talking about today are already in our catalog and are on our reading list. He was introduced to the practice of science as an undergraduate at Princeton University, where he studied with Julian Jaynes, a psychologist, and Bart Hobel, who's a neuroscientist. And our guest is currently actively involved in advancing innovations in neurology and rehabilitative medicine through his support of fundamental research. This now getting into COVID. On February 1st, 2020, remember that's before the pandemic was announced by the World Health Organization, Ken predicted on two Twitter posts, one, that the news out of China was suspect, two, that it gave the appearance of being a news media campaign for flu shots, and three, it could possibly lead to the rapid development of dangerous coronavirus vaccines with more focus on speed than science. Talk about being ahead of the curve. In August of that year, 2020, he released the documentary Fauci's First Fraud, which was cited 28 times in the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. book, The Real Anthony Fauci. He's also the author of another book on COVID, really interesting one, called What the Nurses Saw, with the unique perspective in that book about the systemic medical murders that took place and continue to take place under cover of COVID hysteria. However, today, Ken, we're going to be talking about, I'd like to start off talking about the Kennedys. You've written a couple of books about the Kennedys. Most recent one is called JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism. Now, Ken, I want to set this up by telling you that we recently had a very interesting guest on the show who's a brilliant, one of the leading experts on the Kennedy investigation. His name is James Eugenio, and he's connected to Oliver Stone and some of the development of some of his documentary research. So your book, I've read the most recent one, the first one I noted, haven't gotten the second one yet, but I thought this would be a very interesting conversation to talk to you about the Kennedys. And just to set this up, Donald Trump, one of the first things he did, he made about 200 executive orders on his first day in office. But one of the first things he did is he released these Kennedy files. Now, Ken, a lot of people are wondering, what are these files about and why are they important? Are you able to enlighten us on this topic?
Well, I may throw a curve at you and say, we already know who did it. and this was like the dance of the seven veils. They released one little thing and then another little thing, and now theoretically, people have promised to release these files before.
Right.
Every president, I think, since the assassination, except for Johnson.
Well, it was the law. It was a law that they had to release them by 2017, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. But hey, the law schmaw.
Hey, wait, I'm a lawyer, Ken. Easy.
Yeah, no, but you know what I mean. There are scofflaws, and our leaders are the greatest scofflaws of all. So I'm going to say that we actually have enough information to know who conceived it, organized it, executed it, and the most important thing is managed to cover it up for over 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so
what's your theory? What's your theory? Who did it?
Okay, so can I tell you first? I have to give you my logic.
Okay,
you walk into a room and there are 10 dogs. The lights go out and a dog bites you on the leg. The lights go back on and you don't know which dog bit you. Right? Okay. But you can find out pretty easily. And the way you do that is you take a measurement of the bite, and then you go and you measure all the jaws of everyone that made the bite. Mm-hmm. And the jaws that fit are the ones that bit. How's that? That's a good. I could use that in a jury trial, right?
It sounds like Johnny Cochran.
You must acquit if
the glove don't fit. You must acquit.
So if you reject the idea that some lone nut just spontaneously took shots, which I think everybody does, then this was a well-organized thing. So it required planning, it required execution, it required getaway planning, and the most important thing is it required suppression of law enforcement and media cover-up that has extended to this day.
Right.
So when we look at those jaws, we have to ask ourselves, who has those jaws? Right. And the only group that I can think of that has those jaws in the United States is the CIA. Now, CIA is way too vague. That's like saying the government did it, or the Chinese did it. That doesn't tell you anything. So we have to look at what department and what person ran the department and was running the department during the John F. Kennedy assassination and the JFK assassination. Who was that person? And what specific special powers did he have and special skills? What jaws did he have that uniquely nobody else had? Now, a lot of people like to say, oh, it was Allen Dulles. And I don't doubt that Allen Dulles was involved. Maybe a lot of your listeners have heard that. But I don't think Allen Dulles was the key man. Okay. And there is a key man, and his name is knowable. What else can I do as a warm-up for this before I spill the beans? Okay. So what we're looking for is a man who has deep personal connections with organized crime. He's a CIA person, but he's actually worked with, negotiated with, hung out with, done deals with, carried out operations with organized crime. We also want somebody that is a known fascist and known to be fascist friendly, Nazi and fascist friendly. And what else do we need?
This picture's starting to form now.
Is it? We'll see. If I give you the name right away, it's no fun. So we have to have some showbiz here.
Sure.
So he's got to have the organized crime ties, because they did use organized crime people in the operation, because they're the only guys that can shoot straight sometimes. Right. and they probably used international organized crime people, because that's when you do a hit, you don't get a hitman from your local town. You call somebody from a completely different state. So, but in any event, we've got the organized crime angle. We want somebody who was not friends, because no one was friends with J. Edgar Hoover, but had a strong working relationship with J. Edgar Hoover. We need somebody with that kind of qualification. We need somebody that had a grudge regarding Cuba. What else do we need? There's so many things, so little time. We need somebody who, here's the most important thing, would have found his head in a noose had Kennedy lived. And that's the one that really brings us to the ringleader. All right. Now let's define, before I reveal the name, let me define his job.
This is fun. This is like this old 50s show, What's My Line? You
exactly. Right. So, and I wonder, some people might be guessing. By the way, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have been able to answer this question based on the clues I've given. Wouldn't have had a clue. But I did a little research and a little thinking.
A lot of research.
I'm a logician. Is that it? Logic person? I'm a logic person.
Yes.
But I'm also a logistics person because I'm in business. I have to deliver things, manufacture things, sell things, warehouse things, make sure the money works. So when I see anything happen in the world, I step back and I figure out, well, how did they do that? They must have had a guy that did this and a guy that did that, and they must have had a getaway car, and they must have had this. Someone had to fill the car with gas. All these details that just are naturally come to me. So counterintelligence. What is counterintelligence? Counterintelligence is spying on spies. That's the simplest version. Right. So that's only part of it. The other part of counterintelligence is making sure the other guy's spies don't spy on you. Okay. The other part of counterintelligence is to make sure that operations that are clandestine are set up correctly and operate in a clandestine manner. And the other part of counterintelligence is making sure after you've done the deed, an assassination, a coup, whatever, dealing drugs, whatever these guys are up to, that's covered up not for a month, but for decades. Because, as you know, if you're an attorney, it's easy to commit a crime. Committing crimes is easy. Getting away with it, right? It's just the easiest thing in the world. Getting away with a crime, wow. Getting away with a crime in broad daylight with that high level of a profile, that takes pros. And that would be within this. So I say only the CIA could have done this because of the cover-up factor. And I say what department of the CIA would have done this? And it had to have been counterintelligence because that's the dog that has the jaws that fit the bite. There is no, maybe there's something I'm missing, but I have to think counterintelligence had to be deeply involved in this. Now, like Anthony Fauci, like J. Edgar Hoover, there was a man who had a lifetime position as the director of counterintelligence at CIA. He got the position in the 1950s, and he never had to go through a congressional hearing. He was just appointed, and CIA directors came and CIA directors went. But this guy was on the job until finally he was removed because he became a raving alcoholic and a maniac, and he had to be removed. And he was fired. But had he not screwed up on a personal level, had he kept it even like Anthony Fauci or J. Edgar Hoover, he would have had his position till he died. But he was in for 20 plus years, and he came, like I said, CIA directors came and went. He was always the man on the spot. Okay. He worked. Now, here's another element of this guy's biography. He worked hand in glove in the development of MK Ultra. Why? Why was he involved? Was MK Ultra kept secret? Was it set up to be a secret operation? Yes, it was. If you're going to do a secret operation through the CIA, you have to knock on the door of counterintelligence and talk to this guy and either personally with him or with one of his staff, work out a plan to cover it up. Cover it up while it's happening and cover it up if it gets exposed. So this guy knew the whole MK Ultra program, including the very real program to find patsy assassins. Okay. And I'm not talking about robots that you can program.
Ken, just to clarify now, MK Ultra, this is this mind manipulation experimentation, right? Could you just elaborate? Some people might not know about that.
This was vast. discovered when we won World War II that the Nazis had tons of science and studies and documentation on psychoactive drugs, on
Right.
torture devices, torture methods. And just like we picked up all the germ warfare information from the Japanese and used it in our own, for our purposes, we adopted all that torture technology and all that mind control. We also were looking for truth serums, ways to get, you capture a spy and you make him tell the truth. And so there was a vast program trying all kinds of different drugs. LSD was one of them. Part of the experimentation included giving LSD to civilians that didn't even know they were being dosed with LSD, and then watching what they did. I mean, really sinister, sick stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, the guy that ran it, Gottlieb, there's a book, I think the title's called The Chief Poisoner, or The Poisoner in Chief. But they also did and in Canada, by the way, at McGill, ghastly experiments on people, putting them in sensory deprivation, no sight, no sound, no touch, and then putting headphones on them and playing, the same saying, the same statement over and over again. Giving people 55 consecutive days of electroshock. One of the things they were trying to do, they wanted to see if they could erase somebody's consciousness entirely, and then reprogramming it to their own standards. They found out they couldn't do it, thank God, because I think we have a soul. I mean, you can injure somebody horrifically, but that person still is there. But what they did find along the way is that there are a very small percentage, but an existing percentage of the population that is highly susceptible to hypnotic suggestion. You tell them to cluck like a chicken, and you do it with enough authority, and they will start clucking like a chicken. And so one of the things MK Ultra did, among all the other dastardly things they did, was they built up a stable of highly hypnotizable people who could be easily controlled using hypnosis. Now, hypnosis sounds like mumbo jumbo, but we all are susceptible to command. Some people are less susceptible than others. Some people are incredibly susceptible. Have you ever been to or seen a stage hypnotism show? The hypnotist looks out over the audience, and he's studying the audience, and he can see from visual cues who is really susceptible. He invites about 20 people on the stage. Then he does a further winnowing, and he comes up with 3 or 4 people who are hyper suggestible. And if you have an audience of 200 or 300, you're going to find 2 or 3 people who you can get to cluck like a chicken and fall asleep and wake up and not even know where they are. Temporarily, you can get them.
I once did a case, Ken, involving an expert witness who was a hypnotist, and he was able to, he actually hypnotized somebody to believe that they were Michael Jackson. And the case was about this. So I actually but wasn't Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, also a product of experiments like this?
He was apparently, as a child, he somehow got under the clutches of the people. But then when he went to Harvard, there was a scientist, a professor, who was part of the MK Ultra program, and that professor was studying how to destroy people psychologically through conversation.
Wow.
And Ted Kaczynski was one of the people that was one of his victims. So they studied all, because they wanted to know how to interrogate better. And they also wanted to create messengers who they could, you could hypnotize somebody, give them a code, and then send them somewhere. And then the person wouldn't even know who sent them, but they would know the right place to go, and they would deliver the right code, and then they'd even forget the code themselves. I mean, they played a lot of games. So MK Ultra was a vast program. It was discovered, but before it got investigated, Richard Helms destroyed all the records. He was then director of the CIA and a close associate of this man whose name I will reveal very shortly. Now, however, thanks to bureaucratic ineptitude, they destroyed the program notes, which were vast. I mean, rooms full. They literally didn't destroy the receipts and the financial records. Somebody forgot to destroy. They must have been in a different building. So those were discovered. And from the financial records, they were able to assemble a picture. It wasn't a total picture. It wasn't a complete picture, but they were able to see, wow, money went for this, money went for that. Yeah. So that's MK Ultra. So MK Ultra was looking for patsies. That's one of the things they're looking for.
Right.
So our friend had one other. I call him our friend. Our friend had one other characteristic. I told you he was in serious risk of being hung had he been caught at what he was doing by the president
For treason.
for treason,
Yeah. Wow.
because he committed an act of treason. And I'm amazed, man. This is not even. There's a official biography of this guy called the Ghost. That's a hint. And this is written by a buttoned up New York Times guy, like, totally serious guy. So it's not debatable what this guy did that was treasonous. And I'll reveal it in a second, but I'm going to give one more thing. There are two memorials, not one, but two memorials to this guy in Israel, even though he's an American citizen. And by the way, he was a WASP. He went to Yale. He wasn't Jewish. He was probably an atheist. He might have even been anti-Semitic, but he was a political Zionist. Okay. And he did some favors for the state of Israel. I'm going to reveal his name in a second. So my book, JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism, is about what was happening in the summer of 1963.
Yeah. So it's a great cover, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really, really great cover. And you found a very unique perspective. Obviously, so many books written about JFK and RFK and the assassinations. I think I'm up to close to a dozen that I've read. But this one has a very unique perspective that you found, and a lot of the things here quite new, quite novel, and which is hard to do on this topic, isn't it?
Yeah. And now some of this material was classified until relatively recently, so we just weren't aware of it. And I think there is a movement within the assassination research community to not talk about this dimension, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Sure.
But we don't just there we go. We don't just refer to documents.
You bring the receipts.
I'm not holding this up very well, but this book is chock full of the actual documents themselves.
Yeah.
And then we provide. Now, what are these documents about? And what was this battle about? On the JFK side, as we know, or maybe we've forgotten, some of us, he was a very effective opponent of nuclear weapons. He got the open air test ban passed by many countries. And that was his first step. He had a plan to start with that. And his ultimate goal was to start dismantling nuclear weapons with the hope of removing them from the planet. That was his goal. So nuclear weapons were a big issue to him. Now, at that time, U.S. had them, Soviet Union had them. I think France had it then. England had it. I think that's it. Did I leave anybody out? And the goal was to stop at that point and not allow any proliferation.
Right.
So the Israelis have a nuclear research facility, and they have been doing all kinds of things there. And Kennedy, in the book, we've got the letters, we've got the diplomatic cables, we've got the telegrams, we've got it all. Was writing them, and very clearly and very explicitly, in a dignified way. He wasn't being a bully, but he was really clear. We need to send inspectors in to see your site right now, not next month. Well, maybe we might have given a month, but not when you want to do it, when we want to do it, because we want to ensure that you're not developing nuclear weapons.
Weapons of mass destruction. Again.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Literal weapons of mass destruction. And it certainly didn't serve the world or the Middle East to have anybody in that part of the world develop a nuclear arsenal. Right. And Kennedy, and he said, and we've got the document. I'm paraphrasing now. If you don't let us in to do the inspections, there will be consequences, and it will affect our support for your country. And of course, the Prime Minister of Israel was giving the usual Israeli BS and shining him on, but Kennedy was emphatic. Meanwhile, his brother Robert Kennedy was fighting on another front, which was, we have a law in the United States, I'm sure Canada has one too. If you're going to be a foreign lobbyist, a lobbyist on behalf of a foreign power, okay, but you got to register with us. And by the way, the law is very strict. Not only do you have to register, if you get together with three, I believe this is true, I have to triple check it. but I have double checked it. If you get together with 3 or more people in this country on behalf of a foreign agent, a foreign country, and give their spiel, you have to report it to our U.S. State Department. So this is a very, very strict law. And of course, Israel was flaunting it. And Robert F. Kennedy was on them. That's the father. And was writing them and was like, no, you do have to comply. Oh, we are a special case. The usual, we're the special case. And Robert Kennedy was saying, you're not a special case, and you got to do it. You got to register. We got to know what you're up to, just like every other country. These 2 things were happening in the summer of 1963. Now, I'm not proposing that Kennedy was killed by the Israelis. But I will say, among the many enemies that John Kennedy had were the Zionists. There's no question about that. They did not like being pushed. They didn't like the fact that he was trying to interfere with their nuclear weapons program. They didn't like the fact that his brother was pushing them to register as lobbyists. So among, there's a long list of people that wanted Kennedy dead, and the Zionists were absolutely one of them. He was respectful to Israel. He was supportive of Israel, but he wasn't going to take any bullshit from them. And he was very clear about it. So while all this was going on, the Israelis were stealing fissionable material from a plant in western Pennsylvania that was it was a private plant run on behalf of the U.S. Navy. The owner happened to be a Zionist, and something like 300 kilograms of weapons grade uranium was missing from that plant. And apparently our friend, director of counterintelligence for 20 years, assisted in that act of treason, because he knew damn well that the president didn't want the Israelis to have a nuclear weapons program. He had to know that. He was the director of counterintelligence for the CIA. He had to know. And what he did was an act of treason. So he had, in addition to his affiliations and his inclinations, he also had if I get caught, I could end up in a noose. So he had a very strong motivation to have Kennedy killed and to participate with a large cabal of people. But I believe this guy was the key man, because he was the guy that knows how to keep secrets. Now, let me tell you how hard he worked to keep the secret. When the head of the Mexico City CIA office, I forget, there's a technical term for their offices, not branch, the station chief. When the station chief of the Mexico City, people don't think of it as a center of espionage. It is. It's like Istanbul was, during World War I, or like Beirut. It's where it's sort of a neutral place where a lot of spies, congregate. A lot of assassins get trained down there too. When the station chief of the Mexico City CIA station died, this fellow personally, as director of counterintelligence, got on an airplane, flew down to Mexico City, confronted the man's widow, and said, "You're supposed to get a pension, and we're going to do everything to make sure that you do get it. Meanwhile, I need to go into your husband's office, and we need to remove some things." They broke into the safe. They took all his papers. Not all. I mean, they took as much as I guess they needed to take. Now, Mexico City is important because we've heard about the idea that Oswald went to Mexico City and all the nonsense. He probably didn't. It was probably a scam to try to paint him as a communist sympathizer. But this station chief knew, and he had been making rumblings that there was more to the story. He had spoken a little bit too much. So when he died, imagine this director of counterintelligence personally getting on the plane, personally confronting the widow, personally making sure all those papers were put in boxes on a U.S. military plane and shipped back to the United States. That's the level of cover-up this guy was involved in. And I'm going to reveal his name in a second. His father was part of the National Cash Register Corporation, which we don't think of as a big deal, but in the 40s and the 30s, that was a hugely important company because we didn't have computers then. And his father was in charge of the Italian branch of that company. And this was when the fascists were in power in Italy. And his family entertained all kinds of fascist business leaders. And what a lot of people don't know is that the Zionists of the 1930s loved fascist Italy for two reasons. One, they loved Mussolini's approach to Ethiopia. Just go and kill all the natives. Don't apologize. Just bomb them. And two, it was sort of mutual affection. Mussolini loved them. So much so that he admitted 100 Zionists to the I was going to say the U.S., the Italian Naval Academy for military training. So this was the atmosphere at the time that this young man was growing up. He saw all these people coming and going. Fascism was in the air. It was very common, by the way, for certain branches of Zionism to proudly call themselves Zionist fascists.
So Mussolini obviously didn't share Hitler's views about the Jews then.
Well, see, it's a mistake to think that Jews and Zionists are the same thing.
Well, why don't you? I know you talk about this in the book.
Yeah,
but maybe you could explain what is Zionism. We hear this a lot.
It was a wacky American and British cult, and then the Rothschild Bank. I mean, they are rich people and they do move a lot of chess pieces around. Looked at them and said, you know what? It would be great to have some Europeans that we control right in the Middle East, right at that juncture. Where and what they were concerned with, by the way, at the time, and we think of this as an antiquated thing, but believe me, it's important. The Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is how you go from Europe to Asia, and it's a really important piece of real estate.
Yeah.
And so even Churchill, people don't know this. Churchill declared himself a Zionist. Now, he wasn't Jewish.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not because he cared about the Star of David or, returning to the land of our ancestors 3,500 years later, but because he thought, what a great idea. We can have our people in the Middle East right at that spot. And that's why the Rothschilds supported the Balfour Declaration. It's a very important piece of real estate. We may say, the Middle East is just a wasteland. Oh, no, not at all. I mean, even before all the energy and oil and gas was found there, it's a trade route. Things have to move from point A to point B. You got to move them through the Middle East often. So you better, and you know who said this too? FDR, who was not a Zionist. FDR said, if you want to rule the world, you've got to control the Middle East.
Wow.
Yeah. So this was, there are a lot of true believer Zionists who are basically useful idiots, and they're they built out the infrastructure that the conspirators wanted, and I call them conspirators because the conspiracy was to inject European control and population and mentality in that part of the world. And there happen to be inconvenient people living there, so they've been in a nonstop frenzy to murder as many of them as they can. And unfortunately, the United States and many other countries are supportive of that. But anyway, you can be a Zionist and not Jewish. You can be a Christian Zionist. And in fact, apparently, there are more Christian Zionists in the United States than there are people in Israel. I know that's mind-boggling, but you guys can Google it. Double check me on it. You can certainly be an atheist Zionist. No problem there. You can be, what other kind of Zionist can you be? Oh, you can be a fascist Zionist, And I've had long conversations with a guy named Jacob Shapiro, who is an Orthodox rabbi. He wrote a great book, if you're up for reading a lot, 1,300 pages, called The Empty Wagon. And his basically his conclusion and what he wants to tell the world is Zionism is literally is theft. They've stolen, they've attempted to steal the Jewish identity. They've wrapped themselves up in all kinds of Jewish paraphernalia and claim to be Jews and claim to represent the Jews and claim Israel is the kingdom of the Jews. This is not a traditional Jewish view. In fact, it's actually against in traditional mainstream Jewish faith. The Jews may not have a kingdom until their Messiah returns. Okay, that's just how they're looking at it, and they expect to live in different countries. They expect to be, some in Canada, some in the United States, some in France, some wherever. They expect to live that way, and their ideal is we honor God, we obey the law of of the country we live in, and we're citizens of the country we live in. We're not citizens of Israel. We're citizens of wherever we live. Yeah, so that's Judaism. Zionism is really a kind of, he calls it a Disneyland version of Judaism, just absolute make believe. So let me, because I don't know how much time we have, so I better spill the beans.
One question though before you go there, John F. Kennedy clearly was not a Zionist, right? In fact,
not at all.
You wrote another book called JFK, John F. Kennedy, Anti-Imperialist, where you show his character and intentions revealed in 5 speeches in 1 telegram. So he was against all of that, which is, I think you're going to tell us, one of the reasons why he was killed, right?
Absolutely. And to give you a thumbnail on that book, in the 1950s, when he was a senator from the state of Massachusetts, when there was no personal or political or professional advantage to him, twice he got on the floor of the Senate and spoke on behalf of indigenous people protecting and defending their independence. One on behalf of French, the Vietnamese, in what was then called French Indochina. I mean, that was an outrageous thing to do. France was our ally, and to criticize them and
of
to
course
say
that ties into Vietnam, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, he was. You know, the idea. Maybe if we ever get to the Oliver Stone movie, we should talk about that Vietnam angle. But Kennedy was well aware of Indochina in the 1950s, so much so that he spent personal political capital to give that speech on the floor of the Senate and say, "Hey, France, back off. This is wrong. I don't think the U.S. should be supporting this." The other country, liberation because they were colonized. The other country he spoke out on the behalf of was Algeria.
Oh,
and intensely, in fact, and nobody knows this. When Algeria finally kicked the French were they killed 1/3 of the population of Algeria. I mean, this was a Holocaust. I mean, just unbelievable, and the cruelty was incredible. They would say, they didn't want, like imperial powers do, they didn't want to fight it out. So what they did was they destroyed all the villages so that the villages couldn't give any support. They destroyed hundreds and hundreds of villages, all civilians, just massacre. So when the first elected official from Algeria, the first president, Kennedy invited him to the White House, and not for a little photo op, a huge, and you can find the video. We might even have it. I think it's on the website. A huge event. Honor guards from all of the 5 branches of government, but not like 3 guys holding the flag. 20 guys from the Marines, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard. I think the vice president was there, but like all the top people. The Joint Chiefs, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This was a red carpet. This was a major display of solidarity and support with the poor of the world, and may I say, the Muslims of the world too. Obviously Algeria is a Muslim country, and we have so much bigotry in this country. I'm sure, and in England, I know, just it's despicable. It's disgusting. Well, John F. Kennedy, had the exact opposite view. He wanted peace and prosperity. And his idea, hey, the Soviet Union was a real risk, a real threat. He said, if we want to win this battle, we have to do it by being partners with the third world, not by participating in their oppression.
Right.
This was his outlook. So that's basically the thumbnail of the book, John F. Kennedy, the Anti-Imperialist. And this aspect of him is so rarely mentioned and so rarely discussed. I felt it was necessary to write a book about it. Yeah.
But it ties into the other book, though, doesn't it? Because
yeah. Well, I got to tell a secret. I haven't told this to anybody publicly. These books were written for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I wanted him to read this because he's always talking about his father and his uncle. And unfortunately, up to this moment, as we're recording this, he is apparently still on the record of supporting Israel. Come hell or high water, whatever they want, give it to them.
Interesting.
And it's a shame. I think it's a real shame. And when you write a book or you write anything, you're thinking of an audience in mind. Well, I was literally thinking of him. Now I knew I was going to publish it, and hopefully many, many people would read it. But the emotional, you need emotional gas, energy to do one of these things. It's a lot of work and a lot of time. That was the emotional energy for me. I just wanted to put the case. I wanted to he's a lawyer. I wanted to put the case in front of him. And he got them. I know he did. I know for two reasons. When Amazon delivers a book to somebody's door, they take a picture and they send you the picture. So I know they were delivered to his door, and I know a very close friend of his also gave him the book. So I know they were delivered to him. Whether he's ever read them or not, I don't know. But these books, I'll tell you, were written with the hope to change his viewpoint. Yeah,
well, he certainly shares your viewpoint on COVID. In fact,
I know.
You collaborated with him on his book, and you've also written your own book, Fauci's First Fraud. And I want to get to what's going on with him right now, because in terms of the congressional hearings and that.
Let me tell you the name. Let me tell you the name of the guy.
You got to spill the tea first.
Let me tell you the name of the guy. And I bet I'm going to guess 90% of your listeners have never even heard the name. James Jesus Angleton.
Wow. Ring
any bells to guys out there?
Not for me. That's a brand new one. Yeah.
Think about it though. Head of counterintelligence for 20 years. Now, I want to say one other thing.
Was he an Eisenhower? Was he an Eisenhower guy? Did he come along?
He would have come in the mid-50s, probably. I mean, he was Dulles brought him in, and Dulles gave him the position. And when Dulles left, he stayed on, and he stayed on through until the mid-late 70s. But I want to say one last thing about this fellow Angleton. This is so important. Angleton was finally removed because he did become a really raging dysfunctional alcoholic, and he just had to go. He was fired, but none of his lieutenants were fired. None of the infrastructure within the CIA that he built up over 20 years was fired. So if people are wondering about the poison in the CIA, if you do a genealogy of the people that worked for Angleton and then the descendants of those people, those are the people that we need to name, and we need to understand who they are. And it's not something that one person can do. I'm very rarely the last word on something, but I'm very often the first word on it.
Yes.
And, you know what I mean? And,
as we've seen, yeah.
And I think if we have genuine, serious Kennedy assassination scholars, you should be finding out all the people that worked under James Jesus Angleton and where they went. And how and who did they train and mentor, and what those people are doing now? Because I guarantee they're venomous human beings.
Well, folks, this what he says told us and more is revealed in our guest's most recent book. It's called JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism. So we've been talking about that book, but now turning to RFK, because there's a tie-in here. We saw recently, we talked about some of these executive orders. But before Trump made his executive orders, former President Biden took the time to pardon Anthony Fauci, which seems strange because it was a blanket pardon. But as far as we know, he isn't convicted of any crimes. Of course, in your book, Fauci's First Fraud, you go into great detail, all those crimes going all the way back to the late 1970s, early 1980s. And you've written another book called What the Nurses Saw. But you were also a contributor to the RFK book, The Real Anthony Fauci. And you're cited several times in that book, I know. I wanted to ask you about this Fauci pardon, and also get your take on what's happening with RFK right now. Some of the questioning he's receiving in his Senate confirmation hearing show that, Big Pharma is very much after him. He was even asked, I believe, whether he would ban any legal action against Big Pharma, which is a strange question. But what's your take on this Fauci thing? First of all, there was even a story that Vladimir Putin was issuing an arrest warrant for him.
I love that. That would be great. Yeah, because he's not pardoned by any other country.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the pardon's very broad, but it's also specific. It only so if he's been murdering people in his spare time as a hobby, he doesn't have a immunity on that. It covers specific governmental roles that he's fulfilled. What's interesting is how far back it goes. I think it goes back to 2016.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
wow, why does it have to go
yeah.
back that far? But yeah, I don't. It's so funny. In the U.S., our leftists are up in arms that Trump pardoned the January 6 people. They just think that's the
Mhm.
most horrible thing in the world, and yet they're totally okay with Fauci getting a pardon for crimes that he, as you point out, he's not only not been convicted of, he's not even been charged.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah,
quite amazing.
these blanket
Uh,
pardons. Well, Biden did this with his whole family as
yeah,
well.
you know
Bizarre.
what?
And he's
However,
not off the hook though, is he, Fauci? He's not out of the woods, is he?
no, because there are little tricks that can be played. He can be brought to testify. He can be compelled to testify. And what's
Hmm.
interesting in the United States, if I understand correctly, because he has immunity about everything that he did in those roles, the our Fifth Amendment that protects people from self-incrimination doesn't apply anymore because he's
I
immune.
believe that's correct. Yes, that
Yeah.
is correct.
Now here's the thing: if they call him in and they ask him questions and he lies, he's just committed a new crime not under the pardon.
What a
And
tangled web we weave
oh,
from
it's
first to
bad.
practice to deceive.
In fact,
Yes.
he didn't. He and his attorneys didn't accept the pardon right away. By the way, because I
Mm,
think they were thinking through some of those issues. And of course, when you
sure.
accept the pardon, you're accepting that you're being pardoned for something. You know,
Right. Yeah.
it's so
It's
mad.
like
I mean,
saying, yeah, do you still beat your wife? Right. Yeah.
right, right. I mean, our country's become so mad. I mean, it's just
Mm,
lunatic that these things could go on.
hmm.
So yeah, that's my look at the pardon situation.
What do you think about RFK now? Obviously, you've written extensively about the vaccines and about big pharma in your book, and also collaborated on RFK's book. Now he is going to be the most important, let's say, government bureaucrat on health. He has a very specific vision about health that he wants to bring into fruition. He basically wants to heal America from chronic illness. That's basically what he's saying, and of course. The left and the Democrats are very, very concerned that this is going to turn into an attack on big pharma. A certain Democrat politician is, oh, she's just clutching her pearls, worried that, oh no, we won't be able to get any more vaccines because he's going to open the door for a floodgate. What do you think is going to unfold here? Do you think there's any chance that RFK Senate confirmation could be derailed, or do you think it's a
It
fait
it it,
accompli?
it could be, because it's all a matter of numbers, and
Yeah.
we just don't know how deep pharma is into these people. We
Mhm,
just need a few Republicans to flip,
mhm,
um, and a few Democrats who've expressed support for Kennedy to not support him.
mhm,
I'm really hoping he gets through. We need him. I saw a really interesting talk by a guy who's an MD and a doctor of public health, and he's a professor at the University of San Francisco, um, California. And he says, "Look, I don't agree with half of what he says, but what's our alternative? I
yeah,
mean, there's no, and from an integrity point of view, from somebody who cares. And, we don't all have to agree on everything, but from somebody who really cares and has a point of view that involves protecting people. Kennedy's the only option. We don't have other candidates. Everybody else is a pharma shill,
yeah,
uh, and boy, did the Democrats, display the fact that they're in pharma's pocket during these
mhm,
hearings. My God, it was
yeah,
just.
for
I watched
sure.
some of them. It was despicable.
Mhm. Well, one of the things that was shocking during the election campaign, and this came up after Donald Trump, the Pennsylvania assassination attempt, and there were questions about his security detail. You recall, and it turns out that RFK had almost no government
He had
protection
he had
whatsoever.
none,
Yeah,
zero.
which is
Yeah.
amazing given his family history and also the fact that he's such a high profile person. I wonder whether I think everybody recognizes that Donald Trump is still in danger, but Donald Trump actually called upon Joe Biden to grant this security detail to RFK. But I'm just wondering out loud, how safe is he, given the interests of the people that he's up against and what they're capable of. Will you venture some thoughts on that, or is that pure speculation?
Well, I don't know if you noticed, if you saw the hearings, there were private bodyguards flanking Kennedy's back, covering Kennedy's
Mm,
back.
mm,
And he was
wow.
escorted out of the hearing room by private bodyguards. And during his campaign, he had to pay for all that bodyguard work, and it's a lot. There's research and
Mm,
there's manpower and there's transportation and logistics. It's
mhm,
super expensive. And
mm.
they gave Trump, they gave him Secret Service protection, but they gave him the third string. I mean,
Mhm.
do you remember the videos where
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean,
Mhm.
and it's easy to mock those women who were flustered and didn't know what they were doing, but they didn't belong there. They were not secret.
Yeah.
Those weren't even Secret Service people. Those were
Mhm.
Department of Homeland Security people who'd been just sort of plucked up and put on the job. They
Yeah.
didn't know what they were doing.
Mhm.
Not their
Mhm.
fault. It's the fault of the
Yeah.
person that deployed them.
Yeah.
But
It's almost begs the question about we were talking off camera about Pete Hegseth's confirmation and some of the things he said, which were controversial about women in combat. It almost seems irrational to accept the idea that there aren't certain jobs for which men and women are better suited, and we could find just as many on one side of the ledger as the other. But the left really cannot accept this, can they? They cannot accept any distinction between men and women, because then that gets into their whole gender fallacy, which is core to leftist ideology. Would you agree?
yeah, and I wonder how they're going to feel if there's ever a draft and they start
Yeah.
drafting the young women leftists, how they're going to like being in a trench. I don't think they want to be. Combat is a horrible thing, and if it has to be done, it has to be done. And we were talking earlier, if your back's to the wall, like for instance
Mm,
for the Kurds or for the Russians against the Nazis, you got to do what you got to do and bring
yeah.
up all hands on deck. But
Hmm.
it should not be your first choice.
Hmm.
And they make the argument, well, if a woman isn't in combat, then she can't be, considered for higher. Most of the generals that are qualified because they were in combat zones. They weren't in combat. They drove through a combat zone once,
Right.
and then they got a whole bunch of ribbons, and now they declare, they could do the same thing for women. But we
Yeah.
don't want women in trenches. We don't want women in firefights. We don't want that. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't want. I don't want it.
Well, unfortunately, and it's not fair to them, we saw this illustrated rather well with the recent California fire disaster,
Oh,
where we just lost all sense of reality. And I mean, it's important also to state, I mean, I think the left is committed to destruction of women. I think
oh yeah,
with
clearly.
because they're of their anti-marriage, anti-motherhood, the whole trans agenda, you could make a very cogent argument is really an assault upon women. And somebody, people smarter than me have said that. I think somebody who's written a bunch of Harry Potter books, the highest selling books in history, it seems, has said the same thing and been vilified for it. But really, it's very interesting seeing what Donald Trump is doing in terms of bringing people like Pete Hegseth and RFK into the picture, because the left must be losing its mind right now in America.
That's probably 90% of the reason Trump did it.
Yeah,
Just for the fun of tweaking the nose of these people.
yeah.
But I
One
think your
final
point,
question. Yeah, go ahead, Ken. Didn't mean to
no, I
interrupt
mean
you.
your point is the anti-women agenda of the left is just appalling. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just unbelievable.
yeah.
I mean, let me just say, putting biological males in young women's sports is is sadistic.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
sadism.
it is, and dangerous. I
And
mean,
well, I mean, these kids,
yeah,
these girls are getting fractured skull. I mean,
hmm
men are bigger. Men have bigger muscles, bigger bone structures. We're stronger,
hmm
and it's not a fair fight. And so I want to just shout out. That's a great evil, and it undermines. You're a young lady, you work hard, and all of a sudden, some dude pushes you off your spot on the team.
hmm
So you're erased. I mean, you could
hmm
literally erase an entire women's sports team with biological males. When then where
hmm
are women supposed to go?
hmm
I mean, it's yeah. Anyway, we don't want to go too off, but I want to
yeah,
make, because I have the floor. I want to say that it's one of the most appalling things the left is doing.
Hmm. Well, really, if you want to destroy a culture, if you want to destroy a society, if you want to destroy the human race, a very effective way to do that is to destroy women, because without women, there are no mothers. Without mothers, we don't have a society. We don't have a culture. We don't have a podcast. But Ken, I want to go back and link up what we've been talking about, what's happening now with the idea of Trump, making this executive order. And you said, I think, more or less that Trump's, releasing these documents is no big deal. Really, he's just, the tea's already been spilled for anybody like you who's taken the time to look. But here's my big question I want to finish off with. Um, what do you think what Donald Trump's presidency is going to mean in terms of resolving this ongoing, really, it's a wound to the American culture, the American psyche, the Kennedy assassinations. What do you think that the Trump presidency is going to mean to that, if anything? Or
You mean
are they sincere? Are they sincere about trying to heal that wound, or do you think this is just really just optics and playing for the crowd?
you mean specifically healing the wound of the assassination?
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that's what Trump's on about, or is there
I, you
something
know,
else
it,
going on?
I want to be supportive of all positive efforts, who's ever making them. He could have done it in the last term, and he didn't.
True.
Nothing stopped him from doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think. Well, I do. I don't think whatever papers come out in revelations are going to be earth shattering. I really frankly think the earth shattering information is that the guy that was the likely quarterback of both the recruitment and the operation and the multi-decade cover up was also a close affiliate of Zionists,
Mhm,
as well as being, he helped them get the atomic bomb. He
mhm.
was a traitor. Uh, I don't think that's going to come out. And maybe this book will get people talking,
I hope
because
so.
I don't think there's a better candidate for a quarterback position than
Mhm,
this particular fellow.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm. Yeah. Well,
that's
fantastic. Ken,
yeah.
a great pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for your time. Again, this is now the third time we've sat down with you, and every time I sit down with you, I learn all kinds of new things, as we did today. Folks, we want to highlight two of Ken's books, although there are many more. We're going to post links to his website where you can find more about him. He's a prolific author. But the ones we've been talking about today are JFK and RFK's secret battle against Zionist extremism. It's a great cover and a great book. We've been talking about it a lot, and it gives a unique perspective. A lot has been written about JFK and RFK and the assassinations, but this gives a unique perspective that our guest has delved into today for us on the how, the why, and the who about what happened with these assassinations, which, as I said, remain a very open inquiry. Just last week, Donald Trump issued an executive order releasing more documentation. So this is even 62 years on, nearly 62 years on since the JFK assassination, and since 1968 with the RFK assassination. These are live questions that really call for inquiry. And so Ken's book is right on the spot. He's also written another book that we talked about here, kind of a companion one, called John F. Kennedy, Anti-Imperialist, His Character and Intentions Revealed in 5 Speeches and 1 Telegram. So those are the 2 books that we're adding to our reading list. But I want to mention his other books that we've talked about on the show previously. Of course, Fauci's First Fraud, which is really a fascinating, brilliant book that was referenced many times in RFK's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, which you have not read yet. You must be living under a rock. And then one of the most really unique books written about COVID, which is What the Nurses Saw, which is a book that Ken wrote, which reveals really what was going on at the hospitals, what was going on there. We saw on social media, these women in their uniforms dancing and all this stuff. But Ken reveals in that book what was really going on, really the travesty of what was done to people and to nurses themselves, because they were hushed up, couldn't tell the truth about what was going on. So our guest has written really a series of really incredible books, and I haven't even gotten to the fact that he's a pioneer on internet marketing, and he's written about that too. So, Ken, we just want to thank you so much for being our special guest here once again, and maybe I'll just let you have the last word.
Well, thank you very much. It's great that people can learn about these books, the existence of these books, and if any of them are interesting, any of the topics are interesting. I think they're pretty good books.
They
And
are.
and as I said earlier, I'm not the last word on any of these subjects, but I'm quite often the first word on a subject, and I hope they'll stimulate other writers and other researchers and a lot of conversation.
Well, thanks. They certainly have for me, and I know they have for many of our listeners. And hopefully, they're going to go out and buy your books. And Ken, if people want to find you, they can find you on your website. That's
Well,
the best way to.
that's my business site. So if they want to
Okay.
make more money, if they've got a business, they want to make more money. But each book has its own website. So whatthenursessaw.com,
Mhm.
Fauci'sFirstFraud.com. And there's a movie. I made a movie in 2020 called Fauci's First Fraud, and the book
Oh,
is a companion. So people can watch the film for free. No opt-in. You don't have to do anything. Just go to Fauci'sFirstFraud.com. And then JFKAntiwar.com. I have both the books, the Kennedy books that we referenced. And then my other book has its own website, and that one's called HowTheWeb1.com.
yes. Wow. What an eclectic catalog. Thank you so much, Ken, for being our special guest here today. Best of luck with all of your future endeavors. And I look forward to having you back again. I presume there's another book in the offing, and we look forward to having you back again to talk about that one.
I promised everybody in my close circle that I won't write another book for a while. I'm going to let everybody digest this, But thank you for the encouragement. I appreciate it. There will be some more, but maybe not in the too near future.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. God bless.
You too. Thank you.